This presentation's regarding how to read a settlement adjustment sheet. We often get questions regarding the settlement adjustment sheet and the funding cost statement. These two documents, which you can see before you, are sent to you a few days before we complete your purchase of any new property. The reasons we send these two documents are: one, for you to see how much your lender is providing, and if there is a shortfall, for you to take that matter up with the lender, or for you to know how much of a shortfall you are required to make up. As you can see from the funding and cost sheet, the amount you need to pay in this particular example is $61,036.64. These documents are sent for you to check the figures, and if you have any issues with the lender as to the amount the lender is lending, you can then take the matter up with the lender, or for you to arrange the shortfall to be provided to us so we can complete the purchase on your behalf. In some instances, stamp duty is paid at settlement, which is the situation in this example. An amount of $38,935 is to be paid, and that amount needs to be provided by you so the settlement can be completed. Now, you will see though from the front page of your contract, the purchase price of the property is $965,000. A 10% deposit was paid, leaving an apparent balance of $868,500. It would not be unreasonable to therefore think that the amount you have to pay on completion is $868,500, but this is not what happens in practice. In practice, you're comparing the contract for sale on the left with the adjustment sheet. You will see that there is a difference of about $341.95 between the balance on the front of the contract and the amount that the purchasers in fact have to pay. The amount due on settlement is not the same as the contract balance, because the balance in the contract does not take into consideration what the vendor has paid in advance for such things as council, water rates, and in some cases strata levies and land tax. Adjustments may be needed to compensate the vendor for your time in the property that the vendor has prepaid. In the example, this works out to be $868,841.95. This is the amount payable at settlement. It is slightly more than the balance of the purchase price shown on the front of the contract. While all the information on the settlement sheet is important, some of the more important figures are these. Council rates need to be adjusted. Water and sewage rates need to be adjusted. Strata levies need to be adjusted if it's strata or community title, and in this particular example, land tax. You'll also see from the funding and cost sheet that stamp duty has to be paid, as well as legal fees, which when all added increase the amount that you need to pay, being more than what appears on the front of the contract. Stamp duty is not always payable. For instance, sometimes the government exempts first home buyers from any obligation to pay stamp duty. When stamp duty and legal costs are paid, this explains why the amount shown on the funding and cost sheet is different to that of the balance of purchase price that appears on the contract for sale. Another reason why the amount you are paying can be more than the balance of the purchase price, less the amount your lender is providing you, is that the amount available to you from the lender is often less than the advised loan amount. The reason for this is that your lender deducts fees and expenses from the total loan amount lent to you. In the example, while the total loan amount is $850,000, after deducting fees, the available funds to you at settlement is the amount of $849,532. You can see the amount the lender is providing and how it will pay the money at completion. These are shown by the checks required, and you can see how we have the lender draw checks, and the checks or amounts of money that you need to provide are on the far right of the funding cost sheet. If you do not understand a settlement sheet, you can be confused by seeing checks drawn to councils and other third parties. As can be seen from the funding cost sheet before you, there's a large check to be drawn for John Brown Proprietary Limited. John Brown Proprietary Limited apparently has no part to play in this transaction. John Brown Proprietary Limited is not the vendor or the vendor's lawyer. The reason for this apparent incorrect name is that you are to pay the balance of the purchase price, in this example $868,841.95, to the vendor as the vendor directs. The vendor has the right to direct you how they want their money. Often a vendor will have to discharge their existing mortgage, explaining why there is a check being drawn for Westpac Banking Corporation. Also, vendors may be purchasing a property on the same day as their sale. The vendor needs their money to complete their purchase. They therefore have you draw the money they need from the money that you have to pay them. What you need to ensure, and what we are there to help you ensure, is that you only pay the amount that you have to pay, being the amount of $868,841.95, including any additional money for stamp duty or legals. Just so long as you only pay the vendor the amount the vendor is legally due, then to whom this money is paid is really of no concern of yours. Who you pay the money to is not of importance. So do not get concerned by there being unknown people receiving checks from the funding and cost sheet. Provided the checks add up to the amount that you have to pay, which in this example is $868,841.95, plus any amounts for legals and stamp duty, then you're not paying any more than you're required, and therefore it doesn't matter how or to whom the vendors want their checks drawn. Now you have an understanding of what the purpose of a settlement sheet is for. We explain how the figures in a New South Wales settlement sheet are obtained. The starting point is a blank settlement sheet. To calculate the adjustments for a settlement sheet, you start with the proposed settlement completion date. Until there is a completion date, the adjustments cannot be calculated. Until the adjustments are calculated, the amount you pay the vendor cannot be calculated. For example, we cannot determine how many days you have to pay the vendor for council rates if we do not know when you will start to be the owner of the property. Once a proposed date for completion is set, we start work on preparing the settlement sheet. In the example, the parties agreed to complete on 16 June 2016. Having set a completion date, the purchase price and deposit after the names are then inserted into the settlement sheet. So we then prepare the settlement adjustment sheet by inserting names of the vendors, the purchasers. We then insert the address of the property, and then we include the price, the deposit paid, and then the apparent balance. The next step is to start to calculate the adjustments that the contract requires to be made between you and the vendor. To calculate the adjustment for council rates, the starting point is using the certificate we obtain on your behalf. As you can see, we obtain a certificate from the particular council, which is known as a Section 603 certificate. The Section 603 certificate shows the name of the current owners and how much of the current year's council rates are paid or are outstanding. The certificate will also show if there's any arrears or late interest payments that the vendors are liable to pay. You can see that the full year's rates were $1,252.66. Of this, the vendor has paid $754.12. Using the information and knowing the anticipated completion date, we determined between you and the vendor who owes to who what. In this particular example, we use a leap year on a 366-day basis. In New South Wales, council rates are levied on a financial year basis from 1 July to 30 June in the following year. You can see from the timeline that if settlement is on 16 June, then the vendor will have been in occupancy of the premises for 352 days. Usually, if rates are unpaid and the period is small, rather than have you incur late payment fees due to the council being slow to amend its ownership records, or your lender being slow in lodging transfer documents, we make adjustments on a paid basis. As there is only 14 days to run, we adjust the council rates as paid. This means we treat the rates as having been paid in full by the vendor and draw from the balance of purchase price payable to the vendor a cheque to the council for the unpaid portion of the current year's rates. In this instance, $506.03. The rates now being paid in full, you as purchaser owe or have to compensate the vendor for 14 days. This is the adjustment in the settlement sheet where we calculate the amount that 14 days rates represents and adjust the purchase price by adding this amount, being $47.92, to the amount that you have to pay. As you can see, this is done in this particular line. So we show 14 days, $47.92 is paid. As we're adjusting on a paid basis, when they have in fact not been paid, we draw from the money that you have to pay the vendor a check for the unpaid portion of $506.03. At settlement, we take that check on your behalf and pay the council rates to make sure that the rates are in fact paid and that you are not at a disadvantage by having drawn this money. We follow the same procedure to adjust water rates. The difference is that in New South Wales, water rates are levied quarterly, so we adjust on a 90 or a 91 day basis, not a 365 day basis as with council rates. As you can see from the water rate search we obtained for you, the vendor has paid the quarter in full. No balance is owing. We follow the same procedure and adjust. Again, there will be 14 days which you need to pay for the quarter, and we work out the adjustment of what 14 days is to the water rates. Similarly, we also obtain for you the water used by the vendor. We obtain the average from the information, we use the average figures and have the vendor compensate you for the time they will be using water for which you would otherwise have to pay. Using the average figures, we adjust for water usage. You can see that these are the particular lines that we add to the settlement adjustment sheet for current water and sewage rates and water usage. We follow the same procedure for strata levies as for council and water rates. In the example, you will see the rates are for a 12-month period. At the time the certificate was issued, it was issued under Section 109. These certificates are now known as Section 184 certificates, although the information in them is the same. On your settlement sheet you will see a Section 184, so we use this number in the example. We adjust the strata levies as appropriate to the circumstances. If there are special levies noted on the Section 184 certificate, who between you and the vendor has to pay them depends upon the terms of the contract you and the vendor agreed with. In this example, there are no special levies to be accounted for. If the property is a strata or community title, then there is to be adjustment for the owner's corporation levies. The standard form contract in New South Wales also requires that the cost of the vendor obtaining the Section 184 certificate, being a prescribed fee, is to be reimbursed by you to them on completion. As such, you will see that an amount of $120 has been added to the settlement adjustment sheet to reimburse the costs of the vendor in obtaining this certificate. We then consider whether land tax is to be adjusted. In this case it does. In this case the vendor is liable for land tax. Depending on the contract, you may either have to adjust for land tax or not. Whether land tax is payable will also depend upon the vendor's liability to pay land tax on the particular land. Generally, for residential land, no adjustment for land tax is payable, but for the purposes of this example, we're adjusting for land tax to explain how adjustments are made. We assume for the purposes of the example land tax has to be adjusted as required by the contract. You as purchaser have to pay 198 days, being the balance of the year till the 31st of December. Again, as with council adjustments, as we are adjusting on a paid basis, a cheque is drawn from the vendor's money to pay the unpaid land tax. We add to the settlement adjustment sheet an amount of $197.46 that you will pay, but we draw from the monies payable to the vendor the full amount of the land tax, being $364. Similarly, at settlement, as with the council cheque, we take this cheque and on your behalf we make sure that the vendor's liability for land tax is discharged by paying the New South Wales Office of Treasury. We then consider if the vendor has to discharge an existing mortgage. We see this from the certificate of title in the contract. Where there is an existing mortgagee, the vendor has to pay you the then current land registration service fee for the lodgement of a discharge of the vendor's mortgage. In the example, the amount that the vendor allows, that is pays you, is $139. The vendor must pay this in full. This amount is deducted from the balance of the purchase price you are required to pay. And you can see this from the settlement adjustment sheet that is appearing on the screen. With all the adjustments made, we calculate the amount of money that you have to pay the vendor at completion. As can be seen, the amount in the example is $868.841.95. This is obtained by adding to the balance of the purchase price the sums you have to pay for council rates, water usage, strata levies, land tax, adjustments for discharge of mortgage, and any allowances for certificates. Once the amount payable by you is known, we contact your lender and confirm the amount that will be available for you to use at completion. We include this amount in the settlement sheet. In the example, the purchaser's loan amount was $850,000. Upon contacting the lender, we're advised that the net available funds for the Joneses is $849,532. It's a lesser sum because the lender is deducting a $100 processing fee and the cost of the registration fees of their new mortgage and the transfer, which will be lodged on your behalf to put the property from the names of the Smiths into your names as the Joneses. We then contact the vendors to find out who they want the $868,841.95 to be paid to. Are cheques needed for them to discharge an existing mortgage, and if they need cheques for third parties? We do this after taking into account any cheques that have to be drawn from the net balance for adjustments for council, water rates, land tax, as the case may be. In this case, there are council rates and land tax that have to be paid, so these cheques are drawn first. As you can see from the example, the vendor directs that their money is to be paid to Vendor Legal Proprietary Limited, presumably in payment of the vendor's legal fees, John Brown Proprietary Limited, and Westpac Banking Corporation. Once we get the vendor's cheques, we include them into the settlement sheet. We then arrange it with your lender to draw more cheques than you have to draw, or for you to EFT to us for your ease and convenience. As stated before, if you do not understand a settlement sheet, you could be confused by seeing cheques drawn to councils and third parties as being amounts you are paying on behalf of the vendor. As can be seen, a large cheque is needed for John Brown Proprietary Limited. John Brown Proprietary Limited has no part to play in your purchase. John Brown Proprietary Limited is not the vendor or the vendor's lawyer. The reason for this apparent incorrect name is that you are to pay the balance of the purchase price. The vendor exercising their rights direct you how they want the $868,841.95 paid, and they tell you through us to draw a cheque to hand to the vendors as settlement in the name of John Brown Proprietary Limited. If you do not draw this cheque, the vendors can refuse to settle. As in this example, the vendor has to discharge their existing mortgage, explaining why there is a cheque to Westpac Banking Corporation. Remember, what you need to ensure, and what we are there to help you to ensure, is that the only amount you pay is the net proceeds of sale, being $868,841.95, plus any stamp duty and legals. Just so long as you only pay that amount to the vendor, then how the amount is paid to the vendor is not your concern. You are fine. Who you pay the amount to is of no importance. So do not get concerned by unknown people receiving cheques. You are not paying people you are not required to pay. So hopefully this explains the use and the ability to read a settlement adjustment sheet. Of course, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at Eddie & Lawyers.